Winter arrived early in the mountain village, pressing down with sharp winds and heavy silence. Snow rested on rooftops like a warning that harder days were coming. Families closed their doors early each evening, saving firewood and counting supplies. Every winter was a test of patience and strength here. The cold did not forgive mistakes, and it did not care about pride. People learned to endure it together, sharing stories near weak fires. This year, however, something felt different in the air. Wei lived at the edge of the village in a small brick house. He was not loud or proud, and most people barely noticed him during the warmer months. He spent his days repairing tools, studying old books, and working quietly with clay and stone. When others hunted or gathered, Wei built and tested things alone. Many thought him strange, but harmless. No one expected him to change anything about winter itself. Inside Wei's house stood a wide brick platform connected to a low stove. It looked like a bed, solid and warm to the touch. Thin channels ran inside the bricks, carefully hidden from sight. When people first saw it, they laughed openly. Some called it a toy, others a foolish waste of time. They said real warmth came only from roaring fires. Wei listened but did not argue. The elders warned him that winter was not the time for experiments. They told stories of failed ideas that led to frozen nights and sickness. Wei nodded politely and thanked them for their concern. Still, he continued shaping clay, sealing cracks, and testing airflow. He had studied this design for years, learning from old drawings and forgotten methods. He trusted what patience and careful work could do. As the first deep freeze arrived, villagers began burning more wood than usual. Smoke curled thick above the roofs every morning and evening. The forest path became crowded with people carrying heavy bundles on their backs. Some worried that supplies would not last until spring. Fear crept quietly into conversations around shared meals. Everyone prepared for a long and difficult season. Wei lit his stove on the first truly cold night. He used only a small stack of firewood, far less than others used. The fire burned gently, sending heat through the hidden channels under the brick bed. The warmth spread slowly, rising through the room without sharp smoke or sudden heat. Wei lay down fully clothed, listening to the wind outside. For the first time that winter, he slept deeply. Morning came with frost covering the windows. Outside, neighbors woke to cold floors and stiff fingers. Wei stepped out of his house calm and rested. His breath did not shake, and his hands moved easily. A neighbor noticed and frowned, saying Wei must have burned his fire all night. Wei smiled and said the fire had gone out hours before dawn. Rumors began to move quietly through the village. Some said Wei was hiding extra firewood. Others said his house was better built than the rest. A few joked that he was lucky, nothing more. Wei continued his routine without responding. Each day, he used less wood than anyone else. Each night, his house stayed warm long after the fire ended. One evening, a strong wind swept through the valley. Flames in many homes struggled to stay alive. People woke up often to feed their fires, fearing the cold would creep into their bones. Wei's house remained still and warm. The brick bed held heat like a memory, releasing it slowly through the night. The design worked exactly as he had hoped. Wei remembered his grandfather, who once spoke of old heating methods from northern regions. He remembered stories of beds that warmed entire families through long winters. At the time, Wei had been young and unsure. Now, those words guided his hands and thoughts. This stove was not new, but it was forgotten. Wei believed forgotten knowledge still had value. Days passed, and firewood stacks outside other homes grew smaller. People began counting logs more carefully. Some argued about fair sharing, others worried about children and elders. The winter showed no sign of easing. Snow continued to fall, sealing paths and slowing travel. The village felt trapped between cold skies and empty forests. One morning, the village headman stopped near Wei's house. He noticed the lack of smoke rising from the chimney. Curious, he knocked on the door. Wei welcomed him inside without hesitation. The headman felt the warmth immediately under his feet. He placed his hand on the brick bed and raised his eyebrows in surprise. The room felt calm and evenly heated. Wei explained how the stove worked in simple words. He spoke about guiding heat instead of wasting it. He showed the channels and the thick walls that stored warmth. The headman listened quietly, saying little. When he left, he did not laugh. His expression was thoughtful and serious. That alone changed how people spoke about Wei. Still, many villagers remained doubtful. They believed strong heat meant visible fire. They trusted what they could see, not what they felt later. Some feared trying something new during winter was too risky. Others worried it was too late to change. Wei did not push his idea on anyone. He believed understanding came best through observation. Another harsh night followed, colder than the last. A family near the river ran out of dry wood and struggled to keep warm. Their children cried from the cold, and neighbors shared what little they had. Wei heard about it the next morning. He felt a heavy weight in his chest but stayed silent. He knew his stove could help, but trust could not be forced. As the sun rose weakly over the mountains, villagers noticed something else. Wei was making fewer trips to the forest. His firewood pile barely changed day to day. While others searched farther and worked harder, Wei stayed close to home. This difference could no longer be ignored. Quiet conversations turned into open questions. Some began calling the brick bed a Chinese bed stove, half as a joke and half in curiosity. They said it sounded old and foreign. They laughed, but not as loudly as before. Behind the laughter was uncertainty. People wondered if they had dismissed something useful too quickly. Pride made it hard to admit doubt. Wei remained patient. He repaired a neighbor's broken tool one afternoon without asking for anything. He helped clear snow from the shared path. He did not boast or explain unless asked. His calm behavior softened resistance more than arguments ever could. Slowly, eyes followed him with interest instead of mockery. One evening, the village gathered in the meeting hall to discuss dwindling firewood. Voices grew tense as options ran out. Someone mentioned Wei's stove, and the room went quiet. All eyes turned toward him. Wei stood slowly, feeling the weight of expectation. He spoke clearly, offering no promises, only what he had seen in his own home. He said the stove used much less wood because it kept heat instead of losing it. He said it required care and proper building. He did not say it was perfect or easy. He only said it worked. The elders exchanged glances. The laughter that once followed his idea did not return. The meeting ended without a decision, but something had shifted. The idea was no longer a joke. It had entered the space of possibility. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering old footprints and paths. Winter still ruled the valley, strong and unforgiving. Yet for the first time, some villagers felt there might be another way to endure it. That night, Wei returned to his warm brick bed. The fire burned briefly, then faded. Heat stayed behind, quiet and steady. As he lay down, he wondered if this winter would change more than just how people stayed warm. He did not know what tomorrow would bring. But the cold outside no longer felt like an enemy he had to fear alone. The next morning arrived with heavy clouds and biting air. Snow fell steadily, covering the village paths again. People moved slower now, saving strength where they could. The memory of the meeting stayed in many minds. Wei's words echoed quietly, not loud but firm. For the first time, winter discussions included hope. That hope was fragile but real. Wei woke early and checked his stove as usual. The bricks were still warm beneath his hand. He added a small amount of wood and adjusted the airflow. The fire burned clean and calm, without struggle. He prepared a simple meal and ate slowly. Outside, the wind pressed hard against the walls. By midday, 2 villagers stopped near Wei's door. They pretended to talk about the weather at first. Both had tired faces and worn coats. Finally, one asked if they could feel the stove again. Wei welcomed them inside without hesitation. They stepped onto the warm floor and stood quietly. Neither laughed this time. They placed their palms on the brick bed and exchanged looks. One whispered that his own house felt colder every night. The other admitted his wood pile was nearly gone. Wei listened carefully, answering only what was asked. He did not push his idea forward. Word spread faster after that visit. People began stopping by, one or two at a time. Some came with doubt, others with quiet hope. Wei showed them the stove structure and explained the flow of heat. He used simple words and clear gestures. He avoided sounding proud or clever. The stove did not impress with flames or noise. Its strength came from patience and steady warmth. Visitors noticed how the room stayed warm without constant fire. They felt the calm in the air. Many left without speaking much. Their faces carried thoughts they had not expected. That evening, the village headman returned. This time, he stayed longer. He asked detailed questions about materials and building time. Wei answered honestly, explaining the effort and care required. He said mistakes could reduce the stove's value. The headman nodded slowly, weighing each word. They talked about the forest and the limits of firewood. They spoke of elders and children struggling through cold nights. The headman finally said the village could no longer rely on old habits alone. Wei felt relief but also responsibility. Change would not be easy. A plan began to form quietly. The headman suggested building one stove as a shared test. It would be placed in the home of an elderly couple near the center of the village. If it worked, others could follow. Wei agreed to help but asked for time. Rushed work would fail. The following days were filled with preparation. Clay was gathered from the riverbank. Old bricks were cleaned and reused. Wei worked alongside younger villagers, teaching them carefully. He explained why each channel mattered. He showed them how thickness affected heat storage. Some villagers watched from a distance. They still doubted but no longer mocked. Others joined, eager to learn. Working together brought warmth of another kind. Even the cold seemed less harsh when hands moved with purpose. The village felt more united than it had all winter. Construction took longer than expected. Mistakes were corrected slowly. Wei insisted on careful sealing and balance. He refused to cut corners, even when fingers grew numb. The elderly couple watched with quiet gratitude. They trusted the process without fully understanding it. The first test fire happened at dusk. A small fire was lit and allowed to burn gently. Smoke moved through the channels as planned. The bricks slowly absorbed the heat. Everyone waited, breath visible in the cold air. Silence filled the room. Hours later, the fire faded. The room stayed warm. The elderly woman sat down carefully on the brick bed. Her face softened as warmth reached her legs. She closed her eyes and smiled faintly. That smile carried more weight than words. That night, the couple slept without waking to add wood. Morning came, and the room remained warm. Neighbors gathered quietly outside, waiting for news. When the door opened, relief spread across their faces. The stove had worked. Doubt weakened after that. Requests followed quickly. Wei warned that he could not build everything alone. He began teaching others instead. Small groups learned the method step by step. Each stove was slightly different, shaped by each home. Firewood use dropped noticeably within days. The forest path grew quieter. Smoke thinned above rooftops. People noticed their bodies felt less strained. Nights became calmer, mornings less painful. Winter was still cold, but no longer crushing. Not everyone adapted easily. One family rushed their build and felt disappointed. Wei helped them fix the flaws patiently. He reminded them that skill took time. The lesson spread quickly. Care mattered more than speed. Children began playing again indoors without shivering. Elders rested longer without fear of cold floors. Meals felt less rushed. The village rhythm changed slowly. People talked more, laughed quietly, and argued less. Wei watched these changes from a distance. He felt satisfaction but stayed humble. He continued his daily tasks without seeking praise. He believed the stove belonged to the village now. Knowledge was meant to be shared, not owned. Snowstorms continued through the valley. Travelers avoided the area, thinking it too harsh. Inside the village, warmth held steady. The Chinese bed stove was no longer a joke. It had become part of survival. One evening, the headman gathered everyone again. This time, faces were brighter. He spoke about planning for next winter. He suggested teaching nearby villages the method. Wei felt nervous but honored. His quiet work had reached far. The meeting ended with agreement, not laughter. Outside, the sky cleared briefly, revealing cold stars. Wei walked home slowly. He lay down on his warm brick bed and stared at the ceiling. Winter still ruled the land, but it no longer ruled their spirits. He knew challenges would come. Change always brought resistance and mistakes. Still, something important had shifted. People had learned to listen again. They had learned that old ideas could solve new problems. As the fire faded beneath the bricks, warmth stayed behind. The stove held heat through the long night. Wei closed his eyes, knowing this winter would be remembered. Not for its cruelty, but for the lesson it taught them all. Midwinter settled deeper into the valley, bringing longer nights and heavier snow. The cold no longer shocked the village, but it still tested endurance. Houses with the new stoves stayed calm and steady. Others worked carefully to finish their own builds. The sound of construction replaced complaints. Winter became a season of learning instead of fear. Wei spent most days moving from home to home. He carried tools, checked seals, and corrected airflow paths. Each stove taught a new lesson. Walls differed, floors shifted, and materials varied. Wei adapted patiently, never rushing. He reminded everyone that heat followed rules, not wishes. Some villagers began keeping records of firewood use. They counted bundles at the start and end of each week. The numbers surprised even the doubters. Wood use dropped sharply across the village. The forest edge remained quiet. People no longer walked long distances for fuel every day. The elders gathered often to talk about what they saw. Many remembered stories from their grandparents about similar systems. They wondered how such knowledge had been lost. Pride and convenience were blamed quietly. The stove reminded them that survival once depended on careful thinking. Old wisdom slowly returned to respect. Children listened closely when adults explained the stove. They asked questions and traced imaginary channels in the air. Some helped mix clay or clean bricks. Learning became part of daily life. Winter lessons felt practical and meaningful. Knowledge passed naturally between generations. Not everything went smoothly. A sudden storm damaged several chimneys. Strong wind forced smoke backward in a few homes. Wei helped fix the designs, adjusting heights and angles. Mistakes became shared lessons. No one blamed the idea itself anymore. As weeks passed, nearby villages noticed changes. Smoke over Wei's village was thinner. Forest paths showed fewer footprints. A trader passing through asked questions. He felt warmth under his feet and looked amazed. News traveled quietly but steadily beyond the valley. One afternoon, a group from a neighboring village arrived. They brought gifts of dried food and warm cloth. Their leader spoke respectfully, asking to learn. Wei felt nervous but agreed. He explained the process slowly, careful not to overwhelm. Sharing felt like responsibility, not pride. The visitors stayed several days. They worked alongside villagers, learning by doing. Cultural differences faded through shared effort. Heat became a common language. At night, they slept warmly and spoke of home. Hope traveled back with them when they left. Back in the village, daily life found a new rhythm. People woke rested and worked with more energy. Sickness became less common. Elders smiled more often. Even arguments softened. Warmth changed more than temperature. Wei noticed changes in himself too. He spoke more, listened more, and felt less isolated. The village no longer saw him as strange. Still, he avoided becoming a center of attention. He preferred watching others succeed. The headman asked Wei to help plan long-term changes. They discussed storage, shared workspaces, and training before winter. The stove opened doors to bigger ideas. Energy use became a shared concern. Planning replaced fear. Spring still felt far away, but its promise grew clearer. Snow melted slightly during sunny afternoons. Roofs dripped quietly. Inside homes, warmth remained steady. The hardest part of winter had passed. One evening, the village gathered for a shared meal. Fires burned gently beneath brick beds. People sat comfortably, eating slowly. Stories flowed easily. Laughter filled the room without strain. Winter no longer silenced joy. During the gathering, an elder stood and spoke. He thanked Wei, but also thanked everyone who learned and shared. He said survival came from listening, not mocking. The room grew quiet in agreement. The lesson felt deeper than heat. Later that night, Wei walked home under a clear sky. Stars shone sharply in the cold air. His house welcomed him with steady warmth. He lay down and thought about how small ideas could change many lives. He felt calm, not proud. The stove beneath him released stored heat slowly. Outside, the wind moved across snow without entering his home. Inside, comfort held strong. Wei closed his eyes, knowing winter was losing its power. Change had taken root. It grew quietly, brick by brick, home by home. The village would not forget this winter. It had learned to trust patience over noise. And that lesson would last long after the snow melted. Late winter brought a quiet change to the valley. Snow still covered the ground, but the cold felt less threatening. Houses stood firm against the wind, holding warmth inside their walls. People moved with more confidence, no longer rushing to feed fires. The season that once ruled their lives had begun to loosen its grip. A sense of control settled gently over the village. Wei noticed how mornings felt different now. Smoke rose lightly instead of thick and heavy. Children stepped onto warm floors without hesitation. Elders stretched their hands without pain. The stove had become part of daily life, no longer something special. Comfort felt normal, and that was its greatest success. As winter eased, villagers began counting what remained of their firewood. The numbers surprised everyone. More than half of the usual supply still rested in storage. People spoke openly about it, amazed by the difference. They realized they had used far less wood than any winter before. The forest had been spared quiet damage. The headman called another meeting near the end of the season. This time, faces were relaxed and hopeful. He spoke about what the village had achieved together. He explained that the stove had reduced firewood use by more than half. Murmurs filled the room as people understood the scale of change. Plans for the future took shape during that meeting. The village agreed to prepare materials before next winter. Younger members would train others in nearby areas. Elders offered to record the method carefully. Knowledge would no longer be left to memory alone. They wanted it protected for the next generation. Wei listened more than he spoke. When asked to lead, he suggested shared leadership instead. He believed the strength came from everyone working together. The stove was not his anymore. It belonged to the people who trusted it and learned from it. That idea earned quiet respect. As days grew slightly longer, snow began to melt along the edges of roofs. Water dripped steadily into frozen ground. The sound felt like a promise. Winter had not been defeated, but it was no longer feared. The village had learned how to face it calmly. One afternoon, travelers returned from neighboring villages. They brought news of similar stoves being built elsewhere. Some villages had already seen the same results. Firewood use dropped, and homes stayed warm. Wei felt both surprised and grateful. The idea had grown beyond him. The travelers asked if Wei would visit in spring to help teach more people. He agreed carefully, knowing he could not promise everything. He believed teaching others to teach was more important. Knowledge spread best when shared freely. The winter had proven that. In the village, children played games around the brick beds. They traced heat paths with their fingers and laughed. Learning felt natural and joyful. Elders watched quietly, knowing these children would remember this winter differently. Not as a time of fear, but as a time of discovery. Wei spent time repairing tools and helping prepare for planting. Warm homes allowed people to plan early. Seeds were sorted, and fields were discussed. Life continued without being delayed by cold. The stove had given them time, and time was precious. One evening, Wei visited the elderly couple who received the first shared stove. They offered him tea and warm bread. Their home felt calm and steady. The old man spoke softly about sleeping through the night without pain. The old woman smiled, holding her cup with steady hands. Wei felt a quiet emotion rise in his chest. He did not speak much, but he listened. Moments like this mattered more than praise. The stove had brought rest, not noise. That was its true gift. As winter's end approached, the village held a small celebration. It was not loud or grand. People shared food and stories. They spoke about lessons learned and mistakes made. Everyone agreed this winter had changed them. The headman stood again and spoke briefly. He said the village had learned to respect both old knowledge and careful thinking. He said laughter should not close minds. His words stayed with everyone. The lesson felt complete. That night, Wei lay on his brick bed one last time before spring. The stove released gentle warmth, even without fire. Outside, the wind felt softer. Inside, peace held strong. Wei closed his eyes, knowing the hardest days were behind them. Spring arrived slowly, as it always did. Snow retreated into shadows. Fields softened under the sun. The village stepped forward together, stronger and wiser. The Chinese bed stove remained, silent and steady. It had started as a joke. It ended as a change in how people lived. Not through force, but through patience. Not through noise, but through warmth. And that lesson stayed long after winter finally left the valley. Spring settled fully into the valley, bringing soft grass and clear skies. The village breathed differently now, lighter and calmer. People opened their doors wide, letting fresh air mix with stored warmth. Winter felt distant, like a long lesson finally understood. Life moved forward without hurry. The season of fear had ended. Wei spent his mornings walking through the village paths. He noticed how homes felt alive again. Walls that once trapped cold now held comfort. People greeted each other with relaxed smiles. The stove had changed habits in ways no one expected. Warmth had reshaped daily life. Fields were prepared earlier than usual that year. Stronger bodies worked the soil with ease. Elders supervised without shivering. Children helped willingly, not rushing back indoors. The time saved during winter returned as energy in spring. The village gained weeks it never had before. The headman organized training days near the old meeting hall. Groups gathered to review stove designs. Elders shared written notes, carefully preserved. Younger villagers practiced building channels with care. Knowledge no longer depended on one person. It lived in many hands now. Wei attended these gatherings quietly. He corrected mistakes gently and encouraged questions. He refused praise when offered. He believed pride weakened learning. The stove had succeeded because people respected it. That respect needed to stay strong. Visitors arrived more often as the weather warmed. Some came from far villages. They asked questions and listened closely. They took notes and drew plans. The idea moved beyond borders. Wei felt both proud and cautious. He reminded visitors that the stove required patience. It was not magic or quick work. Careless building would fail. Many nodded, understanding the warning. The stove taught responsibility as much as warmth. One afternoon, a young boy followed Wei around with endless questions. He asked why heat moved slowly. He asked why bricks mattered more than fire. Wei answered each question calmly. He saw curiosity growing like a seed. The boy later helped teach others. His excitement spread quickly. Learning became something to share, not hide. Wei smiled quietly, knowing the future would carry this knowledge forward. The forest edge showed signs of recovery by late spring. Fewer trees had been cut that winter. Birds returned early. Paths looked less worn. Nature responded to restraint. The village noticed and felt proud. People spoke differently about resources now. Firewood was no longer endless in their minds. They talked about balance and care. Winter had taught them limits. The stove had taught them efficiency. Summer arrived with warmth of another kind. Brick beds rested cool beneath open windows. The stove slept quietly, waiting for cold days. No one dismantled them. They had earned their place. Wei used summer to improve designs. He tested airflow with cool air instead of smoke. He adjusted angles and thickness. Each change was written down. Improvement never stopped. The headman asked Wei to help create a shared guide. Together they worked with elders and youths. Words were simple and clear. Drawings explained each step. The guide belonged to everyone. Copies were shared with nearby villages. Some sent back thanks. Others asked questions. Communication stayed open. The stove connected communities in a quiet way. Autumn came gently that year. Leaves turned slowly. People prepared without fear. Firewood stacks were smaller but sufficient. Confidence replaced worry. Winter no longer felt like an enemy. On the first cold night, many lit their stoves calmly. Fires burned briefly and faded. Warmth stayed behind. Sleep came easily. No one laughed at the stove anymore. Wei lay on his brick bed, listening to the quiet village. He felt no need to prove anything. The lesson had been learned. Knowledge had found its home. The Chinese bed stove had changed more than winter. It had changed how people listened. It had changed how they valued patience. It had changed how they trusted old wisdom. The village moved forward together. Seasons would return as always. Cold would come again. But fear would not return with it. What began as a joke ended as understanding. What began in one home spread to many. And the warmth they gained was more than heat. It was the warmth of shared learning, carried into every future winter.